If you're hyper AI writing sensitive like I am, I'm just going to reassure you that I do intend on using the word quiet in the following sentence. Improvements in your relationship with food are very quiet. And from here on out, I'm going to refer to relationship with food as RWF, just so that I'm not repeating myself 100,000 times. Also, hi, if it's your first time here, my name is Ash. I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and I help athletes with their body composition goals. It just happens so that when you help people with their nutrition and body composition goals, you often have to address things like relationship with food, or RWF. And if you feel like your relationship with food needs a lot of attention, then you should be seeing a specialist. So most people who are working on their relationship with food are waiting for like a moment of arrival, maybe like a day when eating feels 100% easy, when the internal noise goes permanently silent, when food is just food. And like most forms of emotional progress, this moment doesn't really come with like a big splash or anything like that. Instead, you get these tiny, kind of unevenly distributed blips and bloops that compound over time into something that in retrospect looks like change. So in order to demonstrate this, I drew this beautiful graph over here. This is your mood over here on the x-axis. Here you are struggling, here it is getting better. This is time, just kind of going forward continuously. And so maybe what you expect looks something like this. This is what a lot of us expect. This is like we exist in a vacuum and we are very, very hopeful for an ideal situation. Obviously, reality comes in, and what really happens is it looks more like that, right? So like, what could these ebbs and flows possibly represent? Well, maybe here you started therapy, so things were going really well. And then maybe down here you had like some major career struggles. Over here, you had a good amount of time where you could work on your relationship with food, and you kept on going, and wow, you're feeling so good, you're feeling awesome, but then all of a sudden you go through a breakup and then everything feels like it goes back down. However, because you have spent all of this time building skills, you can come back up fairly quickly and come back up there, and then you go so on and so forth. So, you know, as life continues to happen, you're going to keep on ebbing and flowing throughout your progress with your relationship with food, as you would with your training or with pretty much any other skill. That said, the following are the four most meaningful improvements in RWF that I see in my one-to-one athletes. So the first is that individual foods become less emotionally reactive. The most common individual foods I see decreasing in sensitivity are typically high fat and high sugar foods like nut butters and pastries and ice creams. By the way, it's not a surprise that these three foods, which are carbs and fats, are the ones that people have an extremely hard time with. Given that the person is most likely undercarbed and underfatted, if that was a word, it makes total sense that their body is quite literally reaching for the peanut butter jar. Your body isn't dumb, so I would stop treating it like it is. One of the hallmarks of a problematic relationship with food is emotional hyperreactivity, guilt after eating something off plan, or having anxiety in food-centric social situations, or sometimes even like shame that can last hours or even days after a single meal. These responses are the product of years and years of rule-based eating in which foods are morally coded, and the consumption of those foods are often tied to your self-worth. So the progress in this case looks like the emotional charge beginning to dim little by little by little. Again, it's not going to happen like an off switch, but it'll kind of decrease over time. Maybe you eat something that you wouldn't have allowed yourself to before, and the guilt either doesn't arrive or it arrives very briefly and it leaves. Maybe you can have a jar of peanut butter in your pantry without distracting you, or maybe you don't feel the need to compensate the next day after a big meal with copious amounts of exercise. And by the way, this is called a transactional relationship with food, and we definitely don't want a transactional relationship with food either. Secondly, you're making decisions out of want, desire, and not out of fear. So problematic RWF is largely fear-driven, right? Fear of weight gain, fear of losing control, fear of what others will think of you, fear of what maybe you'll even think of yourself, which goes very, very deep. So RWF progress involves a slow migration from fear-based food decision-making to preference-based ones. And this will often show up in just very small decisions, so you do have to kind of look out for them. Some examples: you go to a restaurant and you order what sounds good and what sounds delicious rather than what feels the safest. Or maybe you still choose a salad, but because you actually want one and perhaps you're actually craving fibrous vegetables. And this distinction matters enormously even if the observable behavior looks identical from the outside. Researchers studying intuitive eating have found that intuitive eating is associated with higher, greater psychological well-being and improved body image, independent of weight outcomes. The mechanism, in part, is this shift from external regulation, which is rules, restrictions, external cues, to internal regulation, which is your hunger signals, your satiety, and your genuine preference for certain things. To note, intuitive eating is not necessarily, I'm gonna eat whatever the fuck I want all the time, but rather being able to hear your body's internal cues and understanding how to translate them into appropriate actions from a place of self-respect. And that can be very difficult, and that takes practice. 3, this is a big one, especially in modern day, you are more present in social settings that revolve food. So restaurant outings, potlucks at dinners and things like that. People with difficult relationships with food often describe kind of like a cognitive split that happens during meals. There's like one part of them that is present and speaking, and then there's another part of them that is kind of like running a constant background calculation where they're tracking, they're worrying, they're planning, and they're justifying. And this divided attention is exhausting and is a very meaningful signal of just how much mental real estate food is occupying for you. So progress in this case looks like presence returning to the situation around you. Very specific examples here. You finish dinner with a friend and you realize that you spent most of it actually talking rather than continuously auditing your plate. Or maybe you attend a party and the food table is not the gravitational center of your attention. Another really great one is you didn't look at the menu 5 times in advance to calculate your calories. And lastly, for many people, you're able to eat a meal without replaying it 1,000 times afterward in your head. 4, food has become simply less interesting and you identify less as a foodie. Maybe you're asking, well, Ashley, shouldn't a healthy relationship with food mean enjoying it more? Well, I'd argue that enjoying something maximally does not mean that you also need to have to be completely obsessed with it all the time. I'd also argue that eating more of something does not inherently make it more enjoyable because more is not necessarily better. And if anything, you actually tend to lose sensitivity to the taste of something the more you eat it. See, restrictive and rule-based eating will activate your brain in ways that make forbidden foods feel disproportionately compelling. When food is off limits, the anticipation of eating it and then the act of eating it will carry a heightened neurological signal. There are plenty of studies using fMRI that show that dietary restraint is associated with increased activation in the reward-related brain regions in response to food cues. So basically, your brain is treating restricted food the way that it treats any scarce resource, which is just way more valuable than it actually is. If you're interested in reading these studies, you can check out the description box below. A little note here about identifying as a foodie. For many people who have self-identified as a foodie, like myself, for example, for a very significant portion of their life, it may even feel like a slight loss of identity as your interest in eating food declines. So when that happens, just remember my initial point. You can still enjoy food and experiment and have fun while also feeling sane around it. The goal is to feel sane around it, and the goal is to be able to pay attention to your food interest when you decide and not have it pull your attention away from other things that you're trying to do in your daily life. For my athletes, very specifically, if you train hard, you'll really start to understand that performance nutrition isn't as important as it used to be for you. Now, from a macros and calories perspective, of course, you'll still need a solid combination of carbs, protein, fats, blah, blah, blah. But you'll be significantly less obsessed with weighing out your pre-training sweet potato carbs and dry scooping protein at the cost of a tummy ache, right? You'll be significantly less obsessed with sourcing clean ingredients 100% of the time, and you'll understand the utility of things like sugar-inclusive Gatorade and processed deli meats as protein snacks. You'll also start to understand that as long as you're getting in appropriate total weekly, sometimes daily calories, you'll be able to make training progress regardless of your specific sport. Will there be some room for optimization here? Sure. But if you're reading this, chances are that you have a life outside of training. So just keep your nutrition practical instead of obsessive, and you'll be a happier athlete. Also, just As a little reminder, if you're watching this video, you are probably prioritizing improving your relationship with food for the time being. Remember friends, when your RWF gets better, your life will also just get better because you'll be able to finally pay attention to other things in your daily life. If you need a starting point to improve your relationship with food and to actually take some action, I want you to check out the Anchor Meal Guide in the description box below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.